All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. A couple minutes after 1 here. Thank you for joining the Council to Advance Hunting and Shooting Sports monthly webinar. I'm Marty Hogan. I'm going to kind of be stepping back on this one and giving the reins over to Samantha Pedder. She's with the Council to Advance Hunting and Shooting Sports as well, as you probably already know. Today we got a little bit different webinar going on. We're going to try and get a little more collaboration going. It's going to last a little longer. This one goes till 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So we'll have 90 minutes to kind of really dive deep into evaluations. We have Matt Dunfee of the Wildlife Management Institute with us today, and he's going to be answering all your evaluation questions that you have. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sam so she can get us started here.
Great. Thank you, Marty. Thank you for everyone joining us. Just some reminders. You can see the welcome to the webinar screen in front of you. Like Marty said, this is interactive. We've tried different approaches to engaging the community in educating and discussing and advancing R3 nationwide. This is a mix. If you've been involved in different things we've tried, consider this a mix between the R3 coffee hour and the mic'd up sessions. What we keep hearing is that people are looking for information on evaluation. They want to start evaluating, or they want to continue to evaluate, or there's a lot of questions out there. So we put together this kind of event as a kickoff to go down that path. And through this process, this will help us understand what the questions are out there and how the Council and the Wildlife Management Institute and our other partners can help provide resources to help R3 coordinators on the ground advancing through evaluation. So please take note of those comments. Your audio, if you'd like to submit and talk with your own questions, we welcome you. We want you to do that. That'll help us along too. What we ask is that you call in and enter that number and then put your phone on mute until we call on you. If you look for the icon that says find this icon, it should be in the top bar of your screen. Use that to raise your hand when you have a question. And our staff will be monitoring that so that we can make sure we can get to your questions as we go. Please also introduce yourself in the chat so we know who we're talking to. We found that a lot of people connect with each other through these events, so make note of who you are, where you're coming from, what your name is, so that other people can see where you're coming from. Then please complete the 2 different pods questions that are there. One says, how confident are you with conducting evaluation of your R3 efforts? And then there's another box for you to submit any questions you have regarding R3 and evaluation. We'll use those as well as the chat and people raising their hands just to try to keep the communication going and making this an interactive event. So without further ado, let me move on. Ooh, maybe not. Okay. So we titled this webinar, Diving into Evaluations. We have Matt Dunfee on the phone from Wildlife Management Institute. And from what you might recall, we've been working on R3 for a long time now. I think Matt started down this path in 2011, 2010, a while ago. And there's been some resources out there to help people with evaluation and start that conversation going. But we think that we can do more to help advance it. We know from research conducted by Matt from the Wildlife Management Institute back in 2011 on the number of programs out there. We know there's 420 R3 programs available, and of those programs, not many were even beginning to evaluate. RVSF just conducted another survey of the angling programs, and a very slim % of those were evaluating too. So we know that through this whole process, evaluation is going to be key for us to find success in R3. Which is why we're hosting this webinar and trying to get more discussion going and encouraging more people to go about it. So give me 1 second, guys. Hey, Marty, can you advance the slides for me, please? There we go. So a lot of focus on evaluation in R3 was stimulated by the release of a couple key documents in 2016. And because of the success of the documents like the National Hunting and Shooting Sports Action Plan and the recommendations and strategic tools for effective angler recruitment, retention, reactivation R3 efforts, we have a lot more people on the ground in R3 positions trying to map out R3 efforts and figure out what their organizations can do to increase participation in outdoor recreation. This has drawn a lot of attention to evaluation, and that's why we're here. Please go forward, Marty. So a starting point in working with Matt to develop this sort of presentation and this session for everyone, we wanted to say, if you're at this point, you should be good to participate in this webinar. So a foundation of knowing and starting evaluation processes for your R3 efforts is to look back at the outdoor recreation adoption model. The goal of any R3 effort that we're pursuing is to either create a new outdoor participant or increase participation of current participants in outdoor activities. So we use this model, which is not a new model, it's just being applied to outdoor recreation now, to understand how people go through the process of becoming an outdoor participant and what keeps them involved. All of our different efforts that we do, whether it be a program or a communication campaign, whatever we do spans between these boxes on the model. And we can use evaluation to help us either determine the impact our program is having, or also how can we improve our program to meet that overall goal that we're trying to have with it. So through this kind of collaborative process and understanding what we're doing and evaluating to see how we're doing it and how well we are, we can start to improve our R3 efforts and achieve these ultimate outcomes of creating a new outdoor participant or increasing participation of current participants in outdoor activities. So as we move forward, I encourage you to keep the ORAM handy. We have a lot of resources on that product and on the outdoor recreation adoption model and mapping your efforts available. I encourage you to check those resources out, and I'll show you where to find them at the end of this webinar too if you're not familiar with them. And that's a starting point, Matt. If you'd like to take it from here, I'll bring up your PowerPoint for you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Sam. And for everybody on the call, thanks for joining. I know from the names that were popping up, a lot of you have heard me or other people talk about evaluation. So what I don't want to do, because we have people who have heard some of this, we have people who haven't heard some of this. What I don't want to do is give you a song and dance sort of packaged, here's what evaluation is. Ideally, we'd be in a room and you all could raise hands and we could answer questions that way, but we'll have to stick with the electronic form of the chat box. I figured, or Sam thought we should start just with some fundamental thinking, and this is based on some of the comments she received from a query that she put out on the R3 community website, which was basically, what are topics you are interested in? Where are you stuck at with evaluation? So that's kind of where I want to start. And mainly, everybody who has maybe heard me talk about this or has heard something about evaluation and thinking about it, kind of scrub your brains of that a little bit. And I want to start with just the logic of what we're trying to figure out with evaluation. It seemed from some of the comments, there's some fundamental questions of, what are we really trying to evaluate? Why should we? And what specifically are the questions that we're trying to answer? I think a lot of us are told we have to evaluate, but we're not told exactly why we need to evaluate. And then we start dabbling in it, and we start realizing that this stuff is hard. I'm not going to lie to anybody on this call. Evaluation is not easy because evaluation requires thinking, evaluation requires time, and evaluation requires money. So I think we're in a continuum of all sorts of knowledge right now with R3. 8 years ago, nobody was evaluating. So it was pretty easy to start at the very, very beginning. Now we have a lot of different types of evaluation methods that are being tried out there, and I know a lot of folks who are struggling. So let me just start with sort of the primary, some basic thinking about what we're trying to answer as opposed to just evaluations. I don't like the word evaluation because it has a lot of connotations. So let's just talk about what answers we're trying to get and why as a starting point. And then as the comments come in, although Marty, I just saw the comment box disappear. As the comment box or the comments come in, I'll try to answer those sort of on the fly. So if you have a particular question about something, let me know. I did see one comment before it disappeared there, and I think the comment was, where are the research and documents that we're talking about that Sam opened with? Most of them are available online. Sam's going to provide some links at the end of this where you can look at the studies that were referenced, the surveys of R3 programs, the lack of evaluation there specific to those. Just to set everybody's expectations, just so you know, we do not have a lot of research, if hardly any research, on successful evaluation models specific to R3. The reason is because this is a brand new discussion. People are just now recognizing that they should be evaluating. So recognize we're very early in that field, and everything that we're trying these days is really a pilot and a brand new idea. So let me just jump in here. When you think about evaluation, you got to think about specifically what the heck are you trying to answer. And you can ask a bunch of different questions, but when we ask questions, we have to stop and first think, why do we need to even ask that question? Is that question even appropriate for what we're trying to measure? This always comes back to what are the objectives that we're trying to measure. And let me say them at the beginning. If you have an R3 program, whether it's angling R3, boating R3, shooting R3, hunting R3, trapping R3, underwater polo R3, there are only two ultimate outcomes that you're trying to produce. Number one, you're making a brand new user who otherwise wouldn't be a user unless they went to your event. Or two, you're trying to make a more avid user. If either of those two things are not completed, in other words, if somebody's behavior toward the outdoor activity you're trying to create does not change, you don't have an R3 program. Maybe you have a skills learning program or a good education program, but if it doesn't result in humans' behavior changing, it's not a successful R3 effort. So when we think about what question we might have, what question does R3 evaluation answer? Sort of, let's take anglers as an example. How do we make more anglers? All right, broad question. Well, it's a little bit too broad. Specifically, where I think a lot of us are right here. Does this R3 effort, this angler R3 effort I have, does it result in more anglers or a pool of anglers? That really is the question. That is really the big question that we've had. And until very recently, guys and gals, we have asked the question pretty much just like this. Does this effort result in more anglers? And there's a lot of question marks with that question for a primary reason. It's not a very good question. If we look at the equation like this, does this effort equal more anglers, it's always going to kind of stump us. And the reason is, at least from an evaluation standpoint, it's because we're dealing with humans and we recognize we can't just do one thing to produce another thing. We have to do a series of things to produce a sort of outcome. We have to ask better questions if we're going to get more useful answers. So I'm going to use this thing called results chains that many of you have already somewhat heard about, maybe you're already really bored with. Well, I want to do it a little bit differently here. I don't want to go into the details. What I want to do here is basically flesh out the useful questions we need to ask to determine if the ultimate outcome is happening. So what I've done here is I've just taken an effort over here on the left-hand side, and then the result we're hoping we're getting. Either a brand new pot of anglers or at least an increased population of anglers. That's the goal. If we have an angler R3 program, we're trying to make an increase in our population or an increase in the activity of our population. Now, a lot of stuff happens in the middle, and that's where the logic of evaluation really comes in, the lines of thinking at least. If we have this effort, does it have this impact? And remember, the impact has to be we create a new angler or a more avid angler. And I'm going to phrase those two things with a little bit of jargon here. We're going to call those ultimate outcomes. The ultimate outcomes of any R3 effort are a new user or a more avid user. Those are ultimate outcomes. But there's also a handful of midterm outcomes. There's things that have to happen. There's outcomes that need to happen before you take a newbie and turn them into an angler. Things have to happen before you take a very light angler and convert them to a heavy angler. And understanding what those things are, the progression of things, those are essentially our midterm outcomes. What does this person need to experience, learn, and do before we can reasonably expect that will turn them into an angler or make them go fishing more often? Okay? So let's think about that logic. We have this angler R3 effort. Let's start by asking a question. In order for this effort to work, what has to happen first? I have this program that's just sitting out there. It's not doing anything right now, but here is this program. It's maybe a marketing campaign. It is an advertising campaign, which I guess would be a marketing campaign. Maybe it's a fishing day. Maybe it's a derby, whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but it's sitting out there. What has to happen first for this thing to become effective? Well, I'm going to go through this so you guys can kind of get a feel of how this thinking works. The first thing is the right people have to show up. So if we have this effort to convert a certain kind of person to becoming an angler or change the behavior of somebody, we have to make sure the people, let's call them vulnerable to change, are the actual ones that show up. What we don't want to have is 100 people who've been anglers their entire life and they're fishing 30 days out of the year. Okay, that's probably not our initial goal. These are already our avid crowd. So if we have a program, let's say this is a program where we're really targeted in trying to create anglers from a demographic that doesn't fish much. So essentially we're taking people who have never fished before, or maybe have only gone fishing once, and get them to where they become anglers or become consistent anglers. Okay, so that's what we're shooting for. So step number one, for this effort to work and achieve our long-term goal, the right people have to show up. Okay? The next question, okay, once they show up at my thing, what has to happen next? Well, pretty obvious. They have to enjoy it. They have to have a good time. The way we can phrase it better is this thing we've heard, you've maybe heard used before, a positive experience. In other words, it can't suck when they're there or they're not going to do it again. Okay. Now we're starting to set up a series of if-then statements. Now just follow simply with the logic here because I'm going to give you the why we're doing this at the end. But think of these as if-then. If we have a program, then we have to get the right people that we're trying to influence to attend that program. If the right people show up, well, they really have to have a good time there because if they have a bad time, probably everything we do after that doesn't really matter because all they're going to remember is they had a bad time. So step two, they got to have a good time. Now, if they have a good time while they're there, what we hope will happen is that they increase their knowledge and they'll increase their skills. I want you to start thinking about R3 efforts. This is the inherent underlying logic of nearly every R3 effort that exists. I can say that with a little bit of authority because I've looked at almost all of them, at least that have existed. We believe let's get people in a place, let's teach them some stuff. And if we teach them some stuff, we'll increase their motivation. We're trying to increase people's excitement, their passion, their interest, their motivation of, well, this stuff is really cool. I want to do this more. So I'm not saying this logic is absolutely correct, and that's kind of an interesting line to go down, but at least accept it. Just stick with me for now, and that this is the logic that most of us use. Let's get people to a place. Let's give them a good time. Let's teach them some things that they'll remember and they'll appreciate knowledge, and let's teach them some skills that they're going to need. Hopefully, if we teach those right things in the right conditions, it increases their motivation. The question is, the next question, their motivation to do what? Well, it's fairly logical. It increases their motivation to go fishing. Our goal is to give you what you need and get you excited about it enough to now you're going to go and do this thing on your own. If you do that thing on your own, boom, one of the two ultimate outcomes has been achieved. We have an angler. We have someone who changed their behavior. They went fishing because of our effort. And now, look, we have a chain of logical steps that fills in the R3 effort and its ultimate outcome. Now, there's one other potential door, though, that somebody might go through. They may learn all the stuff, they may get excited, but they also may realize, you know what, this program or this effort or this message showed me that I need a lot more. I'm not quite ready to go by myself. I need something else. By recognizing that that exists, we can be ahead of the game and have another effort to funnel them into. It's either a separate program, here I just call it Angler R3 effort number 2, or sometimes people just want to go back and repeat this first effort. Okay, but if they don't change their behavior, if they don't go fishing, we haven't really achieved our ultimate outcome. So when we look at this thing, the thing I want to highlight is this: participants go fishing. That's the key here. We have to link. Here's the question. Let me sum this thing up here. We have to link our efforts to an individual's behavior change. That's why we have to evaluate. If we don't do that, then all we can prove, and in many cases all that's ever achieved, is one of these other outcomes farther back in the chain. We simply create people who learned something new, and they thought it was cool, but they didn't do anything with it. We just teach somebody some new information, and maybe they appreciate waters a little bit more, but they're actually not going fishing. Well, that's not an R3 program then. That's an aquatic education program. So, like these two things, participants increase their knowledge, participants increase their skills. Those are midterm outcomes to our ultimate outcomes. Are they good outcomes? Sure. But are they the ultimate outcome we're trying to achieve? The way to think about midterm outcomes and ultimate outcomes is that there's usually sort of a minimum number of midterm outcomes that have to be achieved before it's realistic to assume that a long-term outcome can happen. In other words, we can't just invite those people to a location and say, hey, trust us, fishing is awesome, go do it. And we can't expect those people to go, oh, I was just waiting for someone to tell me that. Cool. No, that's not enough has happened. So by thinking about what are sort of the minimum things that have to be achieved before we can honestly believe that this individual is actually going to change their behavior, we have to sort of break our program down into steps like this. Now, here's where, to me, it gets really interesting. This is a lot of hard thinking, and this can be difficult to do. Although, let me just say right here, if you just start with this model and apply it to your effort, you're going to be 90% better than almost anything else that's out there. Oh, what happened?
1 second. There you go.
Okay, thank you. All right. Here's what's fun. Or to me, this is fun. I know you guys think I'm weird. I am weird, but bear with me here. What we've basically done is we have turned our entire effort into a series of hypotheses. And if there is a hypothesis, it must be tested. Let me go back here for a second. Each one of these steps that I outlined, the steps that we know that we have to take people through before we can reasonably assume they're going to change their behavior, I've worded each of these like something that occurred. The target audience attends. Participants have a positive experience. Participants increase their knowledge. The reason why we like to word these steps this way is because that demands proof. Let's look at this positive experience. Participants have a positive experience. Well, I'm claiming that that happened, but did it? If we phrase our steps like this, it challenges us to think, oh, we're going to have to measure if that actually did happen, because everything that follows it depends on the thing actually happening. If we measure that and we find our participants had a bad experience, it probably doesn't matter what skills, what knowledge, what motivation we gave them. They're not going to do it again. So now we're starting to know not only why we need to evaluate, but specifically what we need to evaluate. Okay? This is what it looks like. If we take one of those results and we ask, and we think about, okay, we're going to have to measure this. And let's look at the first one. The target audience attends. Does it? Did it? This is a good one to think about because of a statistic a lot of you folks have heard, and that is, at least within hunting and shooting sports R3 programs, for many of them, over 80% of the participants in those programs or efforts come from hunting cultures. In many cases, they even hunted before, or they're kids whose family hunted. So when you think about that program, it kind of breaks down on the first step. It was a program designed to make brand new hunters from people who hadn't hunted before, and all it ended up doing was selecting for people who we're essentially the kids of hunters that we're going to go hunting anyhow. That kind of violates this first assumption in our step. We weren't really making new hunters. We were essentially giving guaranteed future hunters a really good first experience, but they were going to go hunting anyhow. So by asking an objective of this first result, creating an objective for this first result, it means we have to ask questions of it. It means we have to actually have a sign-up sheet at the beginning that asks them things like, have you ever hunted before? Who in your family hunts? Do you have friends or family? Or do you have friends and others in your social circle who have hunted? How likely is it that you will hunt even if you don't attend this program? If we ask questions like that, we'd be able to determine if we meet our objective. Right here, we wrote it as 100% of the participants are from the target audience. Well, we're going to have to test that. What percentage are actually from the target audience? And maybe if we find that only 30% of the participants are from our target audience, okay, pump the brakes. Everything that happens afterward is kind of going to be, the assumptions of each of those little hypotheses is going to be violated because we're not even getting the people that we built the program for. So we have to measure this. If we look at the next one, and I'm getting close to wrapping this up. I know this is a lot of stuff, but I want to leave time for discussion and some other questions here. And this gives us something to either go back to, ask more questions of, or noodle on a little bit. Our next assumption, our next hypothesis, the participants have a positive experience. All right? Here's the objective the way we lay it down. 75% of participants indicate they had a positive experience. It's probably not reasonable to assume that 100% of everybody who attends the program is going to have a good time because you sometimes have people who are just cranky and just don't, they're hard to make happy. But let's see if 75% is worth it. Okay, now how do we go from the logic of breaking our program down into a series of steps that we know have to happen for the person to change their behavior? How do we go from there to making an objective that allows us to test each of these steps to actually writing the questions? Well, it's right here. Our objective is that 75% of participants indicate they had a positive experience. All right, what's a positive experience? This is where a lot of people stop evaluating because they go, you can't just ask someone, hey, did you have a positive experience? It's not particularly meaningful, and people can lie, and people may interpret positive very differently. So we have to think about what things impact the positive experience. And we could come up with a question like this. First question we could ask them is, how likely is it that you would recommend this event to a friend? By asking somebody if they would recommend this, that tells us something about how they feel about it. Are they willing to put their reputation on the line for the program? We'd also want to know some things about, like, where they stayed, the individual learning sessions, to see if we had a bad instructor that might have impacted their good time, if it rained the whole time, if their mattress was squeaky, if they were too cold. We want to know some of those things because those are going to influence the experience, and it would give us information on, is this person not having a good time because of something we did or something that we just need to control a little bit better? We could also ask another one like this. How likely is it that you would attend another event? Again, asking the person, was this good enough time that you do this again? And then we can also simply ask questions like this. What were your three favorite things and what were your least favorite things? In this case, to measure this outcome from this result, we'd probably have to ask all four of these questions, and then we would have to look at the summation of how all those were asked and see if this person generally had a good time or generally didn't. Okay. Now, let me pause here for a second, because there's maybe there's an underlying point here that's easy to miss. By asking these questions, not only are we validating that an important midterm outcome has occurred, i.e. the person has had a good time, a good positive experience, not only will these questions allow us to document that, these questions allow us to improve our program. If we simply ask at the end of our event, hey, did you go fishing or not afterwards? All we're going to get is a bunch of binary questions, yes or no. That doesn't mean much. More importantly, if most everybody says no, it doesn't tell us why they said no. The ultimate outcome is, did you go fishing or not? Did you change your behavior or not? But if they say no, how do we know what to change? by breaking the program down into these logical steps that are essentially those hypotheses and then asking questions that validate or not these little assumptions that we're making, we will know exactly where our program might be breaking down and exactly how we might need to impact it. For instance, if we ask this question that 80% of the participants say that their least favorite thing was Matt Dunfee leading the session on casting, you'll know, fire Matt Dunfee and get a better instructor there. That instructor is causing your students to get turned off to all the things you're teaching. Okay, improve it, get a new instructor, run another bunch of participants through it, and measure again. Did that improve their experience? Did you see an increase in skills retention? Because remember, you're going to have to measure, did we increase their skills? Did we increase their knowledge? These are the questions you would ask from like an exit survey. You do this enough times, not only are you going to validate your ultimate outcome, but you're going to diagnose where your program might be breaking down. Okay. Let me wrap up this soliloquy with this point. Where things are right now in R3 is we often don't have the luxury of building a program from scratch. If we do have that luxury, what I just showed you today is exactly how you would build a program. Get a handful of people together in a room, define who your target audience is, and then say, okay, everybody, here's our audience. Let's think about how we build a program. What are the logical steps? And essentially, you could start with this little logic chain that I've given you. Use this as a backbone. You can add to it. You can break apart some objectives if it's meaningful to you, and you can essentially line up the logic of your program, and you will therefore build in evaluation right from the beginning. But if you have inherited a series of programs that are already on the ground, and you need to figure out what's going, or you know that you can't just stop the program, but you need to figure out what's happening, you do the exact same thing. Build a little set of steps/hypotheses of what is really happening in this program or effort, then start measuring each of those steps. And in a couple cycles of the program, you're going to figure out exactly what's going wrong. You may find out that, oh, geez, we thought we were getting people who hadn't participated before, but shoot, 60% of the people that are coming from here are hardcore, or that are attending the program are hardcore anglers. You may also find that what you think you're teaching with skills and knowledge, you're actually not teaching anything. People were already coming in with a high level of skills and knowledge. You didn't need to do that, so you could omit that part of the program. Okay, these are the areas of evaluation. Your ultimate outcomes, yes or no, my program worked or it didn't. My people changed their behavior because of my effort or they didn't, as well as midterm outcome evaluation, which we call program improvement evaluation. Where is my program going wrong? Or only 40% of the people going through my program are actually going fishing for the first time, so what's happening with the other 60%? Measuring all these little midterm outcomes is how you determine that. Okay, let me pause there. That was a little crash course in sort of the what we call the theory of everything when it comes to R3 evaluation. On the side, or as a side note, I know Sam's going to send you a reference, but the in Appendix C of the Angler R3 recommendations document, I wrote all this up, and there's a bunch of examples of these, so you folks can reread all this stuff because I know this is fast. But this is mainly just to get our brains going and provide some basic context that is relevant to some of the questions we were asking. But you can go and read that after this webinar is completed. So let me pause there, and Sam, I don't know if you've received any questions or if you have some questions you want to address, or is there anything in what we just went over that maybe we want to reinforce?
Yeah, I think that we're at a good spot here. So if we recap this to this point, there are a bunch of different things going on right now. To get us to our goal of increasing participation, we have to evaluate. I think a lot of us have been told evaluate, evaluate, evaluate. We're here in Matt's laying out how we might go about evaluating and the tools and resources that are available. I see some questions coming in. I have other resources prepped to share with you guys. Before we go into that, one of the questions we're getting is a comment, more so, Matt, from Doug Bert. It says, this first step continues to be a challenge for all of us agencies overall, getting the right bus and the right passenger. And he's talking about when you have your target audience attending, how to keep reflecting on that and how to keep refining that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So, Doug, tell me if I'm wrong, but I guess what I'm interpreting here is finding the right target audience continues to be the biggest challenge for agencies overall. If that is correct, just type yes. If it's incorrect, type no.
Yes.
Okay. I've got to say, this question is an interesting one. I didn't anticipate when we first started working on evaluation that this would be an issue, because it seemed fairly logical that if you target a demographic, if you look at like your license sales database, for example, and you see who are the people that are fishing right now, and you then choose a demographic of people who are not fishing, okay, then you go and you do some marketing to them, you do some invitations to them. It seems logical, but in practice, you're right. What we found is that it can be tricky, specifically to what kind of groups that you're trying to find. However, what I would also say is we have several success stories now where agencies are having no problems finding these people. And I honestly don't know if it's a function of particular regions of the country. I don't know if it's a function of just particular cultures, but we'll pick one of the obvious ones. Let's say food-motivated people. They're naturally adults because adults are the ones that are usually more conscious about local sustainable meat and things like that. We have two states that I like to give examples of. Ohio is one, Georgia is another. Oh, actually 3 states. Wisconsin is a third, that have had no trouble at all finding these people and getting their programs filled up. Georgia employs a tactic of hosting a booth at a farmer's market and giving out free samples of venison, and then having a sign-up list and talking to people about, hey, have you ever thought about wanting to harvest your own venison? They're also very successful at hosting Learn to Hunt at breweries for these adult audiences, really focusing on the food motivation. Ohio DNR found these people through working with local libraries in Cleveland and hosting little Learn to Hunts at local libraries, just 2-hour educational sessions. And at the end of it, asking people, would you like to learn more? And then what they say is they got just flooded with people signing up, that they had to basically call people back and say, hey, we're not going to be able to handle all this capacity right now. We're going to try to figure out how we can make these programs. So there are some success stories like that. But let's say you wanted to find, suburban families that have never gone fishing before, and you want to target that family. How do you market to them? How do you find them? I think the general rule is you have to go where the people are, and you have to go through those avenues where people are. There might be some regulatory challenge with an agency. Can you go to schools? Can you go to local community centers? Can you go to local community events and have a booth there, have some advertising there? You're allowed to do that with an agency. There might be some challenges to that. How some other agencies have gotten over this. I know that Tasha Sorensen, when she worked with Wyoming Game and Fish, she got families, specifically homeschool families, by working with NGOs. She went with NGOs that were already working with these folks and asking them to make a pitch at one of their organizations or use their marketing. And it was wildly successful. I was told by a handful of groups that work on minority urban youth or urban family programs to get them in the outdoors, that they rely heavily on existing NGOs that already work with these families, and whether they're education NGOs, whether they are just social influence NGOs, and making deals with them to do their advertising for them. And again, the reports are that they have no problem filling spots. They simply needed a sort of an introduction to these demographics, an introduction to these groups, and finding a trusted NGO, finding a trusted agency, finding a trusted organization that's already working with them, and allow them to be a middleman to link an agency or a conservation NGO up with these audiences. that's what I'm hearing is working very well. So while it is a challenge, I think it just requires us to be a little bit more market savvy. If you have a marketer in your agency, pick their brains a little bit. But there are definitely avenues out there. And remember, folks, what we're trying to pitch here is not a hard sell. If you look at the nature of American studies, if you look at a lot of other research coming about how America wants to get outdoors, a lot of Americans who are not hunting or fishing or whatever R3 effort you're trying to do want to get into the outdoors. So let's be smart about it. Let's find the groups they're already working with, NGOs that they already trust, and partner up to invite those people to one of our events.
Okay. And through evaluation, Matt, you doing the different surveys, we can continue to refine the audience we're getting. We can use the questions to get feedback on those audiences and who's showing up, and then through kind of adaptive management, adjust that and adjust our program to get to that target audience, right?
Well, right. And what you're alluding to is kind of back up to what Doug was saying there, is screening the audience. So there's one thing in selecting the audience, then there's another thing in making sure they're the ones who show up. And to me, there's a very simple way to do that. If we're to determine that we are getting the right audience, i.e. essentially filtering them, before they participate, we have to ask them some questions. Now, I don't recommend doing paper surveys. It's just ridiculous. We don't need to anymore. We have so many useful electronic tools. If you're having an R3 event, put some effort into making an online registration system, whether it's through your agency or, again, partner with an NGO who might already have an electronic registration system, whether it's built proprietarily, like, let's say, NWTF. You partner with them. People are allowed to register through their online registration system. They're required to ask a few questions. You can look on the backside and say, this person's a yes, this person's a no, this person's a yes, this person's a no. Or at the minimum, if you don't want to go through that, you can at least aggregate the data afterwards and see how many people actually are showing up. Calcamize Event Manager that a lot of us are already using for hunter education. That can be used for innumerable events. A lot of agencies have their own online registrations. So that's essentially a tactic or a tool we could use to help us filter those audiences and determine if we're actually achieving that right target audience.
Perfect. And if you're interested in that kind of tactical implementation level, we did just do a R3 mic'd up with a couple R3 coordinators from across the country talking about Event Manager and about the questions, and I'll provide a link to that here shortly. We have a hand raised, Matt, from Cal. I'm sorry if I say that wrong, but if you're there, yeah, I see your hand. Go ahead and turn your phone off mute, and go ahead and ask your question. Okay, the question that was posted there is there a cost evaluation that should overlay on R3 efforts? Isn't ROI important for long-term viability?
So if I understand this question, it is, do we have to evaluate our return on investment? So essentially, how much does it cost to make an angler versus what we're going to get back from that angler in the long term? Is that correct? So if we have a program that, let's say it costs $250 per head to put a person through this program, are we going to get our $250 back in terms of license sale or something? Go ahead and type yes or no if I'm summarizing that correctly. And I'm gonna go down the road that I got a kind of. All right. The question of return on investment, just in general. Right. Okay. So, what about the cost of staff hours, et cetera? Yeah. So when I mean $250, I mean if you calculate staff time, if you calculate vehicles, if you calculate gas, if you calculate swag, if you calculate actual infrastructure, whatever. Let's say that in total is $250 per student. Is there a threshold by which if we spend a certain amount per individual that it's just not worth it anymore? That's a really intriguing question. And trust me, it's not the first time this has been asked. This is asked a whole lot. And the quick and dirty answer would be, it makes economic sense that if you're going to spend a certain amount on a person, that you should expect them to kick those dollars back to an agency, at least at some point, to where the agency starts to make a return down the road. You know, if it costs $2,000 per student, that's probably too much. When are we going to get our $2,000 back? Okay, so that seems logical. However, there's a couple things that we do need to consider here. One is direct return on investment. And, you know, if you have a program that costs $250 per student and you find that only 20% of them actually become anglers in the long run, I think you should probably look at that program and say, can we improve this program to get maybe 80 or 90% of our participants? Or where is the threshold by which we find this reasonable for our agency to continue doing? And we should, in my estimation, we should all be thinking like that, at least from the outset, because it's going to challenge us to really define what is our return on investment. So let's think about this real briefly from an agency's perspective. First off, an agency has a mission to sustain or conserve natural resources for the current and future generations of their state fish and wildlife agency. That's in their charge to do. So there's a certain amount of, we have this work to do to make sure our population has natural resources and is enjoying those natural resources for current and future generations. But still, we have annual budgets to consider. The thing that I like to, that we need to consider is that if you make one angler with any kind of a program, what are the odds that you only make one angler? What if we chose an audience that was more socially motivated? The thing we do know about making participants is that people do it best when they learn from somebody like them. So I'll give you an example of Wyoming again, because while the program still doesn't exist anymore because Tasha moved on, while it did exist, it found some really interesting things. By focusing on, it wanted to focus on families, but it decided to, the program administrators decided to focus on homeschool families for a couple reasons. But one of the main reasons was because they were sort of a microcosm of a larger community. And what they found as a result was that 1 year after the program, 1 year after attendees went through their program, 90% of the families went hunting as a family at least once and took out at least one new family. So they were smart about their audience selection. They decided they wanted to do families, but they got even smarter and said, yeah, well, what kind of families are going to give us the most return on investment? And homeschoolers are kind of a clannish bunch. I can say that because I was homeschooled. Homeschoolers are kind of a clannish bunch. So if we teach one family, odds are they're going to be ambassadors to their own community. And it turns out that was right. So for every dollar they spent, they got at least double the return in 1 year. Now, what would be interesting is let's measure 5 years out. How many families did they end up taking? The other thing we'll want to consider is that, this one of the reasons why I really push for partnering is because if you partner with an agency, let's say if an agency partners with an industry like Cabela's or a Bass Pro or a little local retail store. Well, that retail store can take some of the burden of cost of the program, plus we just expanded our return on investment, because you know what that retailer cares about is equipment purchases. So those individuals not only purchasing license for the agency, but they end up purchasing equipment from the local stores. Boom, we increase our return on investment there. The third thing that I'll mention, and then I'll shut up about this, is an intangible thing that I wish we had more data on. It's by making an angler, by making a hunter, is there value to the agency in terms of political support? By making an ambassador for the agency, by making someone who thinks well of the agency? That is a really complicated question. And anybody who works for an agency knows that just because someone's a sportsman or woman doesn't mean they're an advocate of the agency. Oftentimes it's the opposite. But if we were the ones that taught them, can we actually create a more, conservation-friendly minded supporter for the agency that could help us push forward policies and budget increases or something down the road? It's a really intriguing question, and I would love some human dimension scientists to do a long-term study on that, because we just don't know. But anyhow, those are three ways I would think about return on investment. But again, and finally, I think we do have to consider that. And if we have a program that is really expensive and we can't document it's making a bunch of anglers, we can't, or hunters or whatever it happens to be, and we can't document that we're having a ripple pond effect, we should really consider, is this the best program for our organization to do, or should we maybe do something else or find a partner to take over the program who might be better equipped to do it cheaper?
And Matt, that point is stirring a lot of conversation too in partners and in return on investment in general, and considering that into our R3 efforts is a leading point. We're getting some comments here though, and some questions via email and everything. What are some resources on social return on investment? Or basically, Ken recommends looking into some other sources of information, some other fields of study on social return on investment literature. And he provided some links in those comments for people to go and check out if they're looking specifically on that topic. Thank you, Ken, for providing those. And then to lead into that, Pete Barlow is saying, is there any correlation between hunters and anglers and the proximity to population centers? In other words, is there a better return on investment for urban populations? And maybe this taps into a little bit of the target audience conversation again, too.
So, Pete, as I'm reading this, is there better return on investment for urban populations? Meaning, is it easier to get people in urban centers to go fishing than it is in rural settings? Because I'm having a hard time understanding. Okay.
Yeah, that's where I was going with that. In the higher, if there's a higher proportion, you were talking about 30% versus 80 or 90% of your target audience actually using the information you're sharing.
Yeah. To my knowledge, I have not seen any research that could even inform a correlation between urban audiences being less of a return on or a better return on investment than urban audiences. The only thing that I can think of that sort of relates to that is we do know that outdoor participation is correlated to driving distance to access. Not necessarily because of the distance, but often because of the expense required to travel a certain distance. And so I guess I think particularly when it comes to fishing, one could take that and sort of stretch that into an argument that if we teach people how to fish, smallmouth or a panfish out of a golf course pond, and they live within 2 blocks of the pond, they're more likely to do it because they're so close. I think there could be an argument there, but beyond that, I'm not sure that that there's anything out there.
Research-wise, right, Matt?
Yeah, research-wise, yeah.
Okay. So Jennifer brought up a point, and it says, we have never calculated ROI for each fish stocked, but agencies invest tons of money into it every year. I think this kind of brings up a key point that's sort of a theme here. As we keep moving down the R3 path, our science behind the R3, thanks for Doug Bert for coining that too, the science behind that R3 is going to improve. People often ask, what are some sources of information? Who's doing what? How can I implement or copy off of others or see and learn from their experience as well? Part of the caveat here is not a lot of people have been evaluating, and if they are being evaluated, not a lot of them are publishing it. There is sources of information just to tap on that, like the Human Dimensions of Wildlife that have papers coming out. Lincoln Larson from North Carolina State just published a paper in there about locavores and attracting R3 program participants on college campuses. There's been some local posts, and I'll post some links here as examples, on the R3 community from Jennifer Wisniewski on her email efforts and communication for R3, and then Doug Bert posted for on the surveys and his process and using Event Manager. So as we go about, I think there will be a lot more resources put here. But Matt, that's kind of what we're seeing, is that this attention is being drawn for us to evaluate, and we don't have a lot of resources right now because we're just getting into the evaluation. Is that accurate?
Well, that is true. You know, and that's one of the frustrating things about R3 right now is we've created such a fervor. So many good minds out there are working on it. We've created such a fervor over it. It has not been matched by a commensurate amount of science to inform that fervor, and unfortunately, science takes time. Anybody in here who has worked as a scientist and as a trained scientist knows that true science that provides useful information takes a long time. So I think we're really in the stage of R3 hypotheses and hypothesis testing. And we should look at every one of those not as good or bad, but as very informative to help guide our efforts. You know, what Jennifer states there, it's actually interesting when we think, and Jennifer, I'm not sure which way you were leaning this, so I'm just going to arrogantly take it down the road that is interesting to me, and tell me if I really blow it here. But you know, one of the things that the Wildlife Management Institute does is we review state fish and wildlife agencies for efficiency. We've been doing it for almost 80 years, and we've done almost 100 of these reviews. And one of the recent things that agencies, I can tell you from experience, are really asking themselves hard questions on are things like stocking fish, stocking pheasants, and why are we doing it if the public doesn't need it? Does the public need it? Or are we doing it for biological reasons? In a few cases, states are stocking fish or birds or other animals simply to bring up sustainable populations of native species. But most of the time, particularly with fisheries, they're stocking fish because of consumer demands. People want fish stocked. Or here's the interesting thing we found. Agencies assume people want fish stocked. What we haven't found very much in a lot of the states that we've reviewed is agencies with a well-informed public engagement plan that lets them know where to stock fish, what fish to stock, how much fish to stock. Because if we're stocking fish to support our angling populations, our public who wants them, I think we should really be looking close at return on investment. And what agencies have found is those that are willing to ask that, which honestly, folks, is a really good corollary to R3, because stocking fish is a tactic that could be part of an R3 strategy. In other words, if you have a bunch of urban anglers, let's say, let me piggyback these last two comments. Let's say you have a bunch of fishable waters in an urban area, and you start an urban R3, angler R3 program. And everybody gets excited because they realize, oh my gosh, I can fish right down here, and you haul out a fish trailer, and you show them how easy it is to cook fish. It gets them all excited, but fish numbers are low, or at least they cycle annually because the ponds are shallow and there's winter kill. Okay? Well, if you have a stocking program that's tied closely into public information or public involvement, you would be asking your different publics, where do you go fishing? Where do you find fish the least? What kind of species are you interested in? And if we were asking those questions, and let's say we even asked a question at the end of our Urban Angler R3 program and said, let's say a year after the program, we went back to our participants and asked them, what's the biggest barrier for you to continue fishing? And 75% of them said, there's just very few fish in the ponds you taught us to fish. Boom. Let's stop there, and then let's ask them again. A year later, did you start fishing more? So where I see this is another example where we as agencies and organizations need to think very carefully where we're spending money, because we may be spending it in places that we don't need it, or we may be spending it in places that aren't really necessary to continue angling participation. Of course, people, avid anglers like me, I really like it when I can limit out. But not limiting out isn't going to stop me from not fishing. However, not limiting out might stop a newbie from fishing, at least for the few years. So between those two, let me suffer and go find some better access, and let's put our resources into individuals who it means a lot more to their long-term fishing career to stock those waters where they are.
We got an exactly, so I think you're going down the right path there, Matt, with that comment.
All right. Great mind.
One of the questions out there, so I've gotten some texted to me and some submitted here too. Doug Bert, I think the map on the screen is your measure of ROI. Did you create a customer? Do you have the data to support that? My question is essentially, how many are doing this model from head to tail? And more than once to get that trend data. And before you answer that, I think if you can read Megan's question too, that's getting into the other side of it is, definitely interested in more conversation or information on setting benchmarks for the objectives and we are trying to measure. And now that we have created a survey and done that evaluation, how do we begin to use and interpret the data collected? How many times do we have to do this process? And how many times do we take action on that trend data? So kind of from those two comments, if you can see them in the bars, they're saying how many people have done this process and how far do we keep doing it before we make changes to our programs and that sort of topic, Matt.
Great question. And this is really timely because literally it was yesterday morning I was visiting with some colleagues at Colorado State University in Human Dimensions about this very thing. And it basically comes down to this. How many times do you have to, or I shouldn't say how many, when can you look at a body of data about an experience that people are having and then use that as a benchmark by which you can make the assumption if it happened this way this many times for these people, we're comfortable assuming it's going to continue to happen this way. So let's go back to our urban fishing example. Let's say we set up a program like this. Let's say we measure all the steps that we see here on the screen. We're using a combination of online registration, and which is essentially a pre-survey, and then we're doing a post-event survey right before they leave, and then we're looking at our license database system a year later to see if these individuals are actually purchasing licenses. Okay, so we do that, and we start gathering this information. Let's say we do this program 8 times a year, and we do it for 2 years, and we have all these data. We know about who's attending. We've got our audience filtered. We've tweaked, we've seen where the program works well, where it hasn't. Presumably during that time, we're making tweaks as we're seeing data come in. If we find, again, that Matthew Dunfee bores the brains out of everybody that attends, we've replaced him, and we've got this program really working well. And we're seeing consistently that we're getting, let's say, 72% of our participants are buying a fishing license a year later on their own. That's what our program is doing, and we're pretty happy with it. When can we stop doing this and just keep, let's ratchet it down to just the online registration. We know if we get these kind of people, can we assume now that if we get these kind of people that we were inviting in our first 8 iterations, if we hold that tight, everything else is going to work pretty well? That was the question I was curious about. When can we stop doing that evaluation? Now, here's the answer that I got back. The pure academic answer is, well, you should never stop evaluating. Okay, that's why I got out of academia. So I pushed it a little bit farther. I said, yeah, of course, but really when? And they said, honestly, if you really want to pull it out, it's when you stop seeing variability in your data. So let's say, we measured our program 6 times, and we really started looking at our trends, and we saw, our numbers are kind of bouncing all over the place while we're tweaking this. So let's run our evaluations for 1 more year. After a year, after the second year, we start to see things smooth out. The general feeling is once you start to see your numbers smooth out and get really consistent, it's probably okay to then assume as long as we don't change the conditions of this program, as long as we don't significantly change any of the variables like the audience, like the time of year, like the length of the program, like any of those things, as long as we don't change that, we can assume we're going to have a similar effect, and we can back off the midterm outcomes and simply start measuring our ultimate outcomes. So here's what I'm saying is, technically you should never stop evaluating, but if you start evaluating the best way right at the beginning, you're already going to have the ability to measure your ultimate outcome, which is, did somebody buy a license, which is, remember, an indicator for the behavior change. The license purchase isn't the point. The license purchase is the indicator that the behavior change happened. So as long as you have that in place for the first research, then pull back all of your midterm evaluation stuff, all of your surveys, and just measure that. Measure how many, and if about 72% keep consistently purchasing their licenses, then you can say, you know what, Everything else is probably happening in the middle, and we're good to go.
So there is a point, is what you're saying, that we know all of our programs and efforts are not going to hit 100% of creating an angler or a hunter or keeping them going more, right? So using evaluation as a way to set those trends and manage your R3 efforts overall by knowing what they're doing and tweaking them as you need to.
Right. And there's a lot of science on this, folks. Whether you look at human dimension science, whether you look at biological science, we use sample data all the time. If you look at this conversation and going, dear God, there is no way we can do this evaluation long term. Okay, fine. I'll probably challenge you on that point if we're talking one-on-one, but I'll concede here. Then don't do it for everybody, but at least sample it. If you have an organization that is you're doing, let's say, I'll give you 37 angler R3 programs, not just efforts, specific programs. You're doing 37 a year. You know you can't measure all of them? Okay, measure 5 of them. Just start somewhere. Just sample and just even measure them once. Build this little chain out. Make some surveys. But if you don't have don't overload yourself with so much work that you're not going to be able to analyze any of the data. Keep it small, but at least sample. Pick a representative sample that you think is reasonable for this program type. Measure them and see what you get. Even if you could do that, you would learn so much about your assumptions with the program. You'd learn so much about the ultimate impact. And here's the kicker, folks. This is what I always like to remember, particularly for state fish and wildlife agencies here. Then you will then have at least some data. You can go to your division chief, your supervisor, and say, look, this is what is happening. This is why you need to listen to me and listen to my recommendations to make some changes so we improve our efficiency. My little side note here, let me put in here, my first motivation in doing this whole R3 stuff is because I saw my colleagues in state fish and wildlife agencies consistently get the door slammed on their face when they would go to their supervisor, they'd go to their director and say, I don't think our program is working the way we think it is. We need to measure it or we need to just change it. What they always got back was, well, what do you know? Where's the data? How do you know it's not working? And they'd give an anecdote. Well, the commissioner's daughter went to this program, and he tells me she had a great time, so this program's working. And if you don't have any data, you don't have any metrics, you're never going to defeat that argument. So start small. Practice. Even consider your first run of evaluation as practice, and pick even just one program. I think you could probably do 3, but just fine. Just do 1. Go through the processes that we're talking about. Practice asking questions, and spend time building some infrastructure. Can we do this electronically? Can we have an online registration form? Can we have students answer these questions electronically so it saves my time? Can we link up their names to our database so I can just check ultimate outcomes? Spend more time doing that, and then just practice evaluation once. And once you do that, you'll work out the kinks, and you can start to ramp up a little bit.
Okay. So it is approachable. If you walk away from this webinar, we hope that you're looking at evaluation as approachable and taking those first steps. Matt, we're at about 2:11. We have about 20 minutes. Sarah Baxter submitted a question in regards to the fishing and audiences in urban areas conversation, and it said that it sounds like HIP registration for angling. Has this been done anywhere? I'm not familiar with any kind of roster to ask how many people are harvesting fish or anything like that. Are you, Matt?
No, a national program like HIP, as far as I know, there isn't anything like that for angling.
Okay. And then Susan Stefan is responding. Did I miss something for Katie? Okay, there we go. Sorry, Katie. Besides surveys, how do you recommend evaluating each step along the way? And can you see Susan's response? Using data mining of licensed transactions to answer a research question. And also in Kansas, they are looking at possibly using metrics such as click-through rates on a web page, pre- and post-marketing efforts to determine if a marketing campaign was a success. So you'd speak to that, Matt?
I can. So that's very good because it brings up the context of the real answer, which is, well, it depends. And mainly what it depends on is the type of R3 effort we're talking about. If you're talking about a marketing, messaging, or a communications strategy where you are sending out things like emails, where you are sending out advertising, where you are driving people to a website for more information, there are ways, again, we're going to call them indicators. They're indicators of intent or indicators of behavior change or indicators of motivation. So if you put up a billboard, let's say, and it's really cool billboard advertising how close fishing is to you and how meaningful it is to your life and that it's the cure for cancer, whatever it is. You put it up there and then you put a QR code and a website. Okay, you post that, you start measuring how many people go to that link, and then you want to measure, you can also see how many people spend, or how long people spend time there, and how many other pages they click through, and where they ultimately go. Now, what can we infer from that? Well, we can infer midterm outcomes. We can infer that, okay, we increased their desire for more information, they were motivated to go to the website, or at least they were curious, and they were curious enough that they clicked through a little bit. Now, if we could follow that click-through to a license purchase, all right, maybe we'd have something there, but in many cases that's difficult, if not impossible to do. So what we have to remember is, for that message, we can document people's interest and where they're going. However, it gets pretty fuzzy when we try to link that to license sales, at least individually. However, let's say we run that billboard for 3 weeks. We can also check in that 3-week period if we get a bump in our license sales. And then if we've got a good enough database system, if we have a kind of system that Samantha Pedder is pushing and is kind of providing the guidance on, started by the work that came out of WACWA, if we have a database system that could tell us about demographics, who are these people buying licenses, what general part of the state are they coming from, are they close to that billboard, we can actually make some pretty tight correlations and say, hey, this billboard, at least within a certain amount of confidence, you know, we're comfortable saying we got, let's say, $25,000 worth of license revenue from, because this bump occurred right during the time period when we did this bulletin board, and we really didn't do anything else. So you can use some things like that, particularly in marketing messages. So that's sort of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, when we're dealing with a program with individuals, we have a pack of people we invite to a thing, and we teach them stuff at the thing, and then we want to see if that being at that thing makes them go and change their behavior. Well, ultimately, we can use the license purchases of those people. If we collect their names and the appropriate information, we can use license purchases as an indicator of the ultimate outcome. But how do we ask some of the midterm outcomes in the middle? To be honest with you, the reality is, in most cases, you have to ask a survey. You have to ask them a question that they have to respond to if you really want to get the kind of data that we're talking about. Now, there are quicker and easier ways to do this than a paper survey. That's often what a lot of us think about, because at least within our training in Safe Fish and Wildlife agencies, we do paper surveys. But there are, we could do things like having a QR code at our event and say, hey, click on this code. If you answer the survey, you're going to get a prize by one of our partners. There's even another way you could do it. Let's say if you do this program, this urban program, and you put 30 people through, if your agency is willing, as one of the questions prior to purchasing a license online, many agencies are doing this now. They're asking a few questions that you have to answer before you push the final submit button to purchase your license. You could ask questions like, did you come here from attending a Wyoming Game and Fish Learn to Fishing event? Yes or no? And then they could have it, how satisfied were you with that program? You could just ask those 2 questions. And then you could see a little bit about, okay, we are getting people from that program. So there are some ways you could do it that way, but ultimately, if you really want to do the program improvement questions that we were talking about, really get to those midterm outcomes, there's really not much better way than a survey.
Okay. There's some discussion about the formative assessment strategies, which you, like in person on the spot, which you just spoke to, if we're getting down in the weeds. the surveys are the best way to go about that. Excuse me. It looks like Maggie Lindsay has been doing some hand raising in person there at the event, pre and post during the event, and snapping photos of it. Matt, do you think this is an area that will expand with time as well?
Well, I think what it'll do is it'll, see how to say this. There are a lot of assessment tools that are already out there, and there's a lot of techniques out there beyond just our R3 field. There's a lot of stuff in education. What Maggie, I think, was recommending, there's actually some assessment tools out there where essentially there's evaluation forms that your instructors fill out, and you have a lead instructor ask questions, and your side instructors count hands. And so you're essentially doing a survey with everybody, but you have other people doing counts, and they sort of write down how many people said yes, how many people said no. You know, you're somewhat limited because you answer binary questions. It's usually yeses or nos, but you can do it rapidly. You can do it in a group. It works well for kids. So there are some other ways. I would remember this. This is sort of a truth in measuring people. There's a direct correlation with how easy it is to measure and how useful the information is. Generally, the easier it is to get the data, the less informative the data itself. So you have to make a judgment, what is good enough, and I'm a huge proponent of good enough. What is good enough for me to validate that this result actually happened? And it's not a function of these kids are excited and they're going to raise their hands about everything, or that they don't really understand the question, or that I'm only getting binary responses, whatever. You have to weigh all that out a little bit. And yes, there are a lot of techniques out there. I think the more, and to answer your question, Sam, the more we get comfortable with the idea of evaluation, probably the more comfortable we'll get at be willing to research a little bit and look out there and try some different things and see if it is good enough for us to validate that our program is working.
Okay. Kyle Larimore, and so I'm keeping an eye on time here with 10 minutes. I want to share some resources. I can do it in about 5 minutes. So let's say Kyle and Ryan's questions are the last ones. Sound good, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay, so if the event manager system is integrated with a licensing system using unique ID for users, would that allow us to evaluate based on permit sales?
Okay, so the last part of the question, in other words, if the state agency has a loaner program to increase participation, are they evaluating if that is resulting in license purchases from the loaner participants? Really great question, Ryan, and it's a very controversial one.
Sorry.
What?
Talking about Kyle's first, if the event manager is integrated with the licensing system, basically matching one-to-one. If we have a unique ID assigned to an event participant, and you can track them through license buying habits, I believe, would that allow us to evaluate based on permit sales?
Oh, well, Sam, yeah, you can answer that one.
The
answer is yes. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, so some of the challenge is one-to-one, some of the challenge of evaluation is one-to-one connection, right? Our systems are not caught up with the times right now. And so we struggle with this day in and day out. That's why things like online event registration, data dashboards, things that allow us to access data more easily are becoming so hot and sought after right now. That makes the evaluation overall easier. One-to-one is the most ideal. Most people don't live in that world. If you have a system like that, consider yourself lucky. I know Kentucky was pioneering a system with Jamie Cook. He was able to take his event program participants and say, okay, they came here, now what are they doing? And I know a couple other states like Georgia are able to look up like one person at a time. But then we get into scalability, and that's a whole conversation for another webinar. But yes, if you can do that, you're golden. There's good ways to do it, and we can get into that too. Kyle, I'll email you some resources as well.
But that is really true what you said there, Sam. It's where, and Doug, you said it as well. Honestly, folks, I'll just say it. We have to get there because it's just not that hard. Let me tell you the hardest thing about this. It's culture within ourselves, largely within our agencies and organizations, that we're willing to adopt a technology that really integrates our users into sort of a data management system, which is the foundation of a customer relationship management system, where if they're going to attend one of our events, they have to go online and register. And then that registration the information those people type in is tied to our license database system on the backside, so we can quickly and easily, in real time, run some numbers that, hey, person who went to event A ended up purchasing license B. That would make our lives so much easier, but it is a challenge because of our culture right now. And trust me, myself and a lot of others, we're hammering away at that culture as much as we can at the director level. We're starting to make a change, but in everybody's mind, that's the level we need to get to. We get their information, we get their email address, we can start email marketing them, we can start target marketing them, we can send them license reminders, we can send them season reminders, we can send them new access opportunity reminders, and every time we do, we can link that one-to-one relationship on the backside with the license sale. There's so much technology available out there. We just have to start using it. I really believe we're going to get there. It's just going to take a few early adopters to do so.
Okay, and Kyle added something too, just a clarifying point, I guess, is evaluating, earlier in the conversation, you said evaluating with permit data is almost impossible. Just in context, impossible because right now we don't have the tools in place to do it, right, Matt?
Yep, exactly. But they exist.
Okay.
Yep. And then just because I already started it, Ryan, a lot of folks answered your question. And the idea of loaner programs, I can say universally across the board, these loaner programs were started with no justification that we needed loaner programs. And we don't know if it results in a license sale. Oftentimes they were started at state parks or things where people were camping and there was a fishing pond and the local manager said, hey, it'd be nice if people could go out and go fishing. We might get a license sale. That is interesting, but to date, whenever we've looked at some of those programs to see if it produces long-term anglers or long-term hunters, no. It does not look like they do, but there's very little research. If you do a loaner program for things like bows or shotguns or handguns, there's some equipment purchase stuff. But what I always like to remind folks is, remember, that's PR dollars, and PR dollars isn't a free money pot. It's a matching program, and if the agency doesn't have the matching dollars, it doesn't matter. So I think that's an area we should look a little bit more critically at.
Okay. And we can do some by using evaluation and implementing surveys.
Yay. There you go.
Okay. Okay, so lots of comments on SaaS and data and CRM, and it just makes me giggly. We can get into that a little bit later. Let me bring up these PowerPoints. I'm just making sure I didn't miss any other questions about evaluation directly on the front end. Okay, if I did, scream at me via text. Capital letters work. And while you guys are doing that, I'm going to bring up the other document. And so what this one is going to be, to this point, we talked about ORAM. A lot of people are working on outdoor recreation adoption model, and they're trying to get their heads wrapped around their R3 efforts. What are we doing? And that's where we transition into evaluation. Okay, what are we doing, and how well are we doing it? Where can we make improvements? Should we go make new programs? This is what we've talked about from the get-go, right? A lot of these questions we're asking range from conceptual on how to do evaluation to implementation. What's the best tools? How can I do that? What's the tricks of the trade? When we started to set up this evaluation webinar, we started it because there's a lot of conversation, a lot of questions. We're going to make tools and resources. The council and our partners will work with RBFF on this too, to help move evaluation efforts along. One of those tools that exists right now is the R3 community. These questions you're posting help everyone move forward. You can see everyone's jumping in. I mean, this is an example in of itself. The R3 community exists for you to do the same thing. One of the tools that we have already that we've connected for you guys as you're going down this evaluation path is all the different resources that have been done over time. Over the last, 17 years, Matt? I think RBFF Best Management Practices came out in 2000. People have been looking at evaluation. So we have different tools out there, and I'm just going to highlight some of these, and we will email these out with links to them so you can find them on the R3 community. To get started, if you're at this point of ORAM and mapping your efforts, we have that council has created a handout on what ORAM is in each of the steps. This can help you get into the logic chains. RBFF made a great complementary document that they say worksheet for each Angler R3 effort. It's asking questions like, what's the objective of my program? What threats is it addressing? This can help you start to get into your logic chains and trying to get your questions set up and your evaluation template started. Now, if you're here at this point and you're moving a little bit further down, there are evaluation templates already created. Matt created one of the sets. They're in Appendix C of the National Hunting and Shooting Sports Action Plan. Again, I'll email the link out to this, but you can go on and just type in on the R3 Community Appendix C. But in here, you physically have the questions to start with. And our good friend Charles Evans down in Georgia took it one step further, and I'm going to post this link now. He took a lot of these templates and put them in Google Forms, and they're available on the Google Drive. The recommendation here is if you do go to use this, please make a copy of it and put it on your own drive. These templates right here, though, are now in Google formats. So Matt said stop with paper, go to technical or electronic. Here's a way to do it. SurveyMonkey, there's a bunch of other things that you can make these templates, program your implementation tools, and move forward to make evaluation a little bit easier. Another for backing up. This is for hunting and shooting sports action programs, R3 efforts. RBFS, through their best practices workbook, created again in 2000, but still very relevant information. Chapter 4 of that document is basically how do you know if it's working? Evaluate. And it gives you best practices for program evaluation and some templates examples in there too for fishing and boating programs. So these resources exist and they're linked up and just waiting for you to access them. And then finally, something that's a lot more contemporary. There's survey templates on all outdoor recreation and on the practitioner's guide that Responsive Management and NSSF put out there. If you check out Chapter 2, you'll see a ton of different survey questions. So the templates are there, either electronically or written in Word. And also, Susan from Kansas, you might want to check out this document too from some examples of program evaluations. Our partners and our contractors, such as Southwick Associates, DJ Case and Associates, and Responsive Management, are all doing a lot of evaluation too, and they're very good about publishing the results and accessing them. So we'll work with them in the future in 2018 to bring a lot of this to the R3 community too, because it seems we need a lot more of that available and hands-on ready. So the resources are out there. Go ahead.
Hey, Sam, let me say just one thing real quick. Everybody, when you look at these, you're going to see some differences in how questions are asked. You're going to see some differences in like the responses of questions. Trust me on this one. It doesn't really matter. For what we're trying to do, we're not trying to produce academic published style research here. All of these templates that you may see that Sam just referenced, use the one that seems to work best for you. Use the one that you like the most, the response categories that seem to make sense to you in those questions. Just do it. It really, at the end of the day, to help inform what you need to know to improve your program or see that it's working, they're all good enough. So don't let yourself get wrapped up in the frustration of, hey, why does NSSF ask it this way and RBFF ask it this way and WMI ask it this way? Pick the one you like the best. It's really simple as that.
Thanks. Thank you for that. And if you're looking at the R3 community and going, I can't find it, look at your screen right now. On the landing page, in the middle document, right next to the webinar that you found that you're on here today, says R3 Community Index. If you select that, it takes you to the R3 Community landing page. Look under First Steps and then Evaluations and Surveys, and you'll find a ton of these resources linked right there. We are continuing to evolve how we share this information to you and bring this to the forefront so that you have access to it, and we only get better with your input in events like this. This event that we've done today is giving us a lot of information. We are going to be sending out a survey of your of your experience today, like we do every webinar, but we want more information from you on this one specifically. As we're going into 2018, if there is resources you're looking for, tell us. Tell us what you need. We've made videos. There's an outcomes and outputs video that we created. We have some really great staff through Marty and Cyrus on the council that are doing a great job of helping us condense these ideas together. So please let us know what you think. Tell us and speak to us so that we can continue to kind of evolve this conversation and really hit the mark for what you guys need on the ground success. So with that, Matt, there's one more question there. We are at 2:32. I'm going to post their survey link. Why don't we address that one question because it's a juicy one, and we can let everyone sign off after that. Matt, are you there?
Yep, sorry, I was on mute. Okay, that is, once you've evaluated, what does success look like? This is a great way to wrap up because it brings us right back to the beginning. Your effort has to result in one of two things. You make a new participant, or you make a participant that participates more frequently, more avid. One of those two things has to be accomplished with your program, or it's not an R3 program. The next question is, if we're looking at an R3 effort, how much of that is acceptable? If 20% of the people who receive or are part of the effort either go fishing more frequently or go fishing for the first time, that's a level of success, but I don't know if it is enough success. This is where it depends on you as an agency or an organization. What are you willing to accept? As of right now, what is reasonable to expect, we don't have a lot of data out there, but we do have some shining examples. And I don't think it's unreasonable for us to start with trying to get, well, you know what, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going to give a number. Here's what I would challenge you. Your program has to produce one of those two R3 outcomes. How much your program or effort does that, to what degree the percentage of your participants go and do that, the degree to which the people who receive your message go do that. That's the part you need to be really integrated and active with. Is it reasonable? Does it achieve return on investment? Is that enough behavior change for you to warrant the expense, the time of this program? That's where you need to do some critical thinking. I can't make that determination for you. You have to do that. But the starting point is you have to document that behavior change, or all you really have is a good outdoor education program.
Perfect. So thank you, Matt, for being with us today. Evaluation will continue to be a topic and sometimes a sore spot, but also an opportunity for growth for a lot of us on the ground doing these events and activities. As you move forward, please reach out to us again. I cannot tell you that enough. We wish you a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year. And we hope that evaluation is maybe on your R3 New Year's resolution for 2018. Don't forget to complete that survey and holler at us if you have any questions or any ideas for future resources. Thanks for taking the time to join us. We look forward to working with you in 2018.